debates many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to dive into some news regarding 9/11. And we know that they have the 28 pages they don't want to release. Then we also have the Saudis coming out talking about, well, if you try to implicate us in 9/11, we're dumping the dollar. And kind of want to dive into this because there's a lot behind this. And it's something that we've been talking about for, shortly after, within the years after 9/11. There being these missing links, and they have been brought up. Well, if you look at the full picture, it seems like there's plenty cover-up going on. And, you're a conspiracy theorist has been used so much to try to not let this come to light. And, the 9/11 truther. But when you have the Saudis come out and say, we'll dump the dollar if you even try, implicate us in this. Meaning, don't declassify those documents. I'm going to start off with the Ron Paul Liberty Report, Saudi 9/11 blackmail. Then if I can find this article, I wanted to read this article. And then also, We Are Change has put out one talking about the decline and, the decline of the U.S. dollar. And we'll go ahead and get a little deeper into this after this Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, sir. We've survived the storm so far.
Yes, so far. So maybe someday we'll get our studio soundproofed.
Yeah, we'll get a sponsor.
But so far, so good. But anyway, I want to welcome the audience. We want to go over a subject that is very, very important. Might not have been on the evening news, but it would have been on Zero Hedge and a few other places. And it has to do with Saudi Arabia. And it's a building issue. It's been around for a long time, and we've talked about it. And I've talked about what it was like to be in Washington, D.C. and being hindered to get back to Texas. Yet I knew that the Saudis were getting out scot-free and no questions asked, no interviews by the FBI. But thankful for some of the people who were on the 9/11 Commission, as well as people like Walter Jones, found out that there's a significant portion of the Commission report that has been redacted. And when they read it, they say the American people deserve it. The authors of the report say that it should be seen, that the people deserve to know. But it should have gone without saying. Why aren't we allowed to know what our government is doing? And this is what this is about. But now they're trying to pass legislation where it would permit anybody who was injured or killed on 9/11 that they can sue the Saudi Arabians because it looks like they have had a close association, and we should find out about it. And they've been immune to a certain degree, although there's been some minor rulings in the Supreme Court that said that they should be defendants. Basically, they're not, and they were able not to be subpoenaed during the 9/11 Commission. But it took an interesting twist this week, because you can't talk about Saudi Arabia without talking about national security for us. You can't talk about it without talking about oil. And all of a sudden, it has a big influence on the financial market. So the Saudis came up and said, if you guys in America are going to insist that you're going to restrain us in keeping everything that we do silent and private and secret, we're going to dump dollars. Not a couple dollars, not a couple million, not a couple billion, $750 billion that they're threatening, which could have major ramifications. Of course, most people are arguing, they're not going to do that. That's too big of a problem. And of course, Obama's involved in this. So I'm sure you have been following this and for a long time now, but I find this rather interesting because in a way, it's blackmailing the United States. And are we going to put up with this? If for no other reason, should we kowtow to people saying blackmailing, unless there could be something that we're trying to hide that we have done? And I suspect that might be possible.
And, this story broke over the weekend, the early part of the weekend, and it was huge on the Institute's website and the Liberty Report's website, these stories. And I think because people feel a sense, how dare they? Because we've been conditioned for 15 years about 9/11. But the bill in question was introduced by Chuck Schumer and John Cornyn of Texas, so a conservative Republican, a liberal Democrat, a bipartisan bill in the Senate. It passed the Senate Judiciary Committee in January, unanimously, I think. So it shows that it has some momentum. And what it would do, and I think this is probably what they're afraid of, because I think if you ask any American if they agree with this bill, they would say yes. It simply suspends sovereign immunity, i.e. you cannot sue a sovereign foreign government. It suspends that immunity if a terrorist attack occurs on American soil where American citizens are killed. I think most people would say, well, they shouldn't have immunity if they're sponsoring attacks on our soil. So this presents a huge problem to the Obama administration, which is as quietly as possible until this past weekend, was trying to suppress the bill.
And I think there's always a difference on how they enforce the law. One is that, if they're in the government of Saudi Arabia and they have sovereign immunity and we can do all kinds of things to not even investigate or find out if they had any involvement at all. But think of how many times we have marched over into other countries, including most of the Arab countries, and we're the policemen, so we arrest people, they're suspects, but they don't even get common courtesy of maybe being charged with something. They can be put away for 15 or 20 years and be tortured, and yet a government official is treated differently, and now the goal is to protect that immunity. You know what I'm suspecting is one of the reasons why there's such strong opposition to that is a tit for tat. If we do this to the Saudis, what about the countries who have threatened our own president? If you come into this country, we're going to arrest you for war crimes. And it's always the victor that determines, right and wrong in law. And so we're always the victor, so that is the thing. But if you're on the receiving end, you might say that we need to deal with you, and that's why they have threatened, George W. Bush. If you come into our country, we're going to arrest you for war powers. Maybe it's possible that they're thinking about this. If the Saudis are threatened by loss of sovereign immunity, what would happen if the other one said, we're not going to give sovereign immunity to the United States. And that's always the case on these agreements when we lease. Who's going to punish the military that stays behind and they commit civil crimes? And that's always a big issue in Iraq in particular.
And this just shows, I hope people understand this. This shows that the interventionists in Washington value their ability to continue interventions with impunity over their value of American citizens' lives and justice, because the interventionists want to continue to bomb hospitals in Afghanistan and sewage treatment plants here and there, collateral damage of thousands and tens of thousands of people without being liable whatsoever. So they'll trade justice for American citizens so that they can continue their interventionist foreign policy. And that is, I think, unpatriotic.
You know, the authority to use military force after 9/11 was something that has been tremendously abused to justify going into places that had nothing to do with 9/11. But in a way, in theory at least, there could have been a case made that United States could go into Saudi Arabia. I mean, they had 15 out of 19, that were Saudis, and they got immunity, and they didn't get charged or arrested or questioned at all. So this is almost, they could have used it, but that's not the way you use that military force. It was used to go into Libya and wherever they wanted to go. Oh yeah, Al Qaeda might be there. Of course, Al Qaeda wasn't even there when 9/11 occurred, but it's so abused and then not used when they might have justified it. And that to me is a government operation, and there has to be something going on behind the scenes that the American people aren't allowed to know.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's pushing this is the interest in these 28 pages. If there is some implication of Saudi government involvement and the bill concurrently passes, then you'll have sort of a perfect storm where Americans are genuinely getting pretty frustrated with the Saudis. And as you point out, Walter Jones and a lot of other members of Congress have been very good. There's the 28pages.org. We published one of their pieces, and they exist solely to get these declassified. And I think the pressure is on, and all the millions and millions that the Saudis spent on PR firms in Washington may not be able to protect them from the wrath of the American people.
Well, I took it very personally after 9/11. I was stranded. I wanted to get out of town. I didn't want to be in Washington. I wanted to go to Texas, but we couldn't move for 3 or 4 days, And yet when I heard that all the Saudis in the embassy, they're gone. They have their private jets, no questions asked whatsoever. And that's just not quite fair that I was more mistreated than the Saudis. And then, of course, all the information wasn't out then. But I don't think it took long that they had the suspects that were involved, that they were, 15 of them were Saudi citizens. So there was a reason for that. But by that time, all the Saudis were out of town.
And something that certainly a lot more than I do, but I was interested in what would be the implications. And you say, a lot of people say there's no way they'll go through with this, dumping these treasuries. It's just not going to happen. But what would the implications be for the international markets if they just threw up their hands and said, forget it, we're dumping these?
If they did, it would depend on one factor would be how fast. If they dribbled them out, it might not be huge. But if they did it all at once, it would be huge. The dollar would really crash. But one thing that I had suggested to you that could happen, that could have ramifications, let's say the Saudis threaten to do it, and there's another unrelated incident, maybe with China or somebody else. Maybe, we're antagonizing the Chinese too much, and we get a populace in there putting on too much tariffs or something. And the Chinese start to dump them, and it wouldn't even be related to the Saudis. There was an unintended consequence, or somebody else did something, or, we break out with another war someplace and there's some freezing of assets. Even if it's much smaller, the markets may overreact to it, but it would be devastating to the dollar. It would be devastating to the stock market. I think it would, if the markets believed what was going on, it would be huge for people rushing to protect themselves in gold and silver. But it would usher in a different age. I mean, they're living precariously now in getting by and trying. The government's always reassuring, and the plunge protection team, the government's always saying it's okay, we can take care of the markets and all this. But this is very dangerous to do it. But the potential's there. So in many ways, it's an emphasis that we're a lot weaker than anybody realized. We don't. This doesn't deal with how many troops we have and how many bombs we have and how much air force we have. It's unrelated. It's a financial calamity. And just remember, it was not a war that we had to fight after all those years with the Cold War with the Soviets. That came down for financial reasons. They just couldn't afford it. So we won't be able to afford anything if there's a crash in the dollar. People won't take the dollars. The whole machinery, interest rates would be pushed up, and it would close down the economy. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think you're going to hear total reassurance that it's not going to happen, and also the fact that the Americans just wouldn't let it happen is not going to affect us. So I think that they will do a lot of reassuring. But they did that for years and years, a couple of decades, about when people started dumping dollars for gold, in the 60s. And we gave away more than half of our gold. But finally there was a collapse of the Bretton Woods. So it doesn't have to happen overnight. But once it starts and is perceived in going in that direction, there's going to be a lot of scurrying around. It would be a huge event.
It makes you wonder, because President Obama is going to re-out on Wednesday, just 2 days from today. I wonder if he will counter-threaten, or if he will cajole, or what could be. I mean, I wonder what the day after, if the whole house of cards comes falling down because of Saudis following through with this threat, what would the U.S. do?
I think it'd be interesting to observe a conversation like that. Would it be a conversation between adversaries? Yeah, we're going to do this to you, and the other say, you better not do this. I don't think it is. I think they get together and they're saying, how are we going to smooth this out? But our president would have to say, well, I have to act tough, and the Saudis have to act tough, and they have how far they can go. And of course, we won't do it, but we have to say that because that's what our people want. I mean, that goes on all the time to satisfy the political factions. But it will get out of control because they can't control the system. They can't just say prop up the dollars, because if it's conceivable, if they did that, it would crash the dollar. They can't change that fact, and it truly could.
Yeah.
So I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today on this interesting subject of the Saudis threatening us, for us to not go after them and relinquish on their sovereign immunity. And, of course, we talked a little bit about the ramifications if they ever dump the dollars. I don't think they're going to be dumped this week, but they're threatening it. They're capable of it. It shows you how fragile this system is and how ridiculous our foreign policy is. When you think that the country is the strongest on Sharia law, is the country that we do almost anything to defend them. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. This is another issue, but it also demonstrates the seriousness and the precariousness of our financial system. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Okay, Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Subscribe, check them out. Let me pull this up from Zero Hedge. This from Zero Hedge. Obama responds to Saudi threat to dump treasuries if its role in September 11th is probed. This weekend's biggest and most shocking story was a report that in response to a proposed congressional bill that would allow a probe into the Saudi role behind the September 11th terrorist attacks, Saudi Arabia had threatened the U.S. with dumping its roughly $750 billion in treasury holdings. What was curious about the story is that while Saudi Arabia implicitly admitted that it had a role in the September 11th, the Obama administration was actively doing everything in its power to prevent the bill from passing and thus to keep the truth under wraps, leading many to wonder if Obama was more concerned about his own people or a handful of uber-wealthy Saudi princes. It says here, which this was on the 18th, moments ago, White House spokesman John Ernest chimed in and validated all those fears. Ernest's bill would open U.S. to global legal vulnerabilities. White House says it is confident that Saudis recognize the shared interest with the U.S. in protecting stability of international financial system. Ernest don't know if bill will be topic on Obama's Saudi visit. In short, whether due to a Saudi threat or just because of its default position on the matter, Obama will block the bill and no further probes into Saudi involvement in the September 11th tragedy will be allowed. Now, we already have Ron Paul really didn't dive into it, which kind of, I think he might have overlooked and missed something that not just with, if Trump gets into office and tariffs against China, that's one thing, but China's already actively working against the U.S. dollar. I believe that it's China and Russia and some of their allies and this whole new banking system. You even got some European countries signed on to that, South American countries, some Middle Eastern countries. So they're already actively working on this. And this is something that could happen. Whether the Saudi thing comes out or not, this still could happen. And then you just keep going down the rabbit hole when it comes to monetary policy, the Fed, and the collapse of the dollar eventually will happen as a global currency. I really see it happening. And We Are Change has put out a short clip. Is this the end of the U.S. dollar? And even though silver and gold prices have been down, I've noticed it's been selling really, really quickly. There's a few places I go and buy silver and gold. And what they usually have and what they have now is pretty significant, that it tells you that other people are feeling it. Let me go ahead and get into this. We Are Change. Is this the end of the U.S. dollar?
Is this the collapse of the U.S. dollar? In this video, we're going to talk about incredible breaking global news when it comes to China creating a gold-backed yuan and Saudi Arabia threatening to destabilize the U.S. economy. Now, just a few days ago, on April 10th, it has come out that the Federal Reserve Chairman, Janet Yellen, has been having many secret and private meetings with Barack Obama. The last time this has happened between Ben Bernanke and George W. Bush, we have had the housing market crash in 2008. The number of meetings, the secrecy, the urgency of them makes people speculate. And of course, the news coming out of this is directly before the news from China and Saudi Arabia going against the US dollar. But what do you expect in a financial market that is run by the very crooks who defraud us, who set up these bailouts for themselves after defrauding, lying, and manipulating the economic market in 2008 to benefit themselves so they would always come up top? These people create the problem. These people pay themselves off with bailouts and then slap themselves on the wrist, like we see Goldman Sachs here, who received the $5 billion fine but won't actually pay all of that. They will pay a lot less than that. No one in the business has the balls to confront these criminals. But of course, we went up to Ben Bernanke right afterwards and we asked him.
How can the American public trust you when you engineer that top secret, the largest bailout in the history of the world?
How can we trust you when you engineered the largest bailout, the secret bailout in the history of the world? This criminal grabbed my microphone and tried to rip it away from me. Look at him, scouring away to security, like, get him out of here, get out of here. I told him, I'm not a dog, stop talking to me like a dog. Let's talk about Bilderberg, how about that? No, of course, get kicked out of there. Ben Bernanke faced off with the biggest financial crimes that is being committed by the very people who run the financial institutions in this country. Now, of course, these meetings with Janet Yellen and Barack Obama came right before China just announced a new gold-backed yuan that would give them control over the price of gold. But in a stunning move, China actually said no to the dollar when it comes to their new gold-backed currency. In a shocking move, likely to crush the U.S. economy overnight, China is refusing to make its new gold-backed yuan convertible from or to U.S. dollars. This currency was just introduced yesterday on April 19th, 2016. And of course, we're seeing the ramifications of this as stocks are stumbling and the dollar is at a 10-month low, saying that this will be the collapse of the U.S. dollar. Of course, the U.S. dollar is mainly as powerful as it is because of U.S. hegemony, because of other countries using the dollar to trade, to buy oil in. And now, with pissing off Russia, with the latest geopolitical moves in Syria, they have aligned themselves with China, and there is a new economic war. Of course, the conflict between the United States and China in the South Asian Sea has made the situation even worse. But we have to understand the ramifications are playing off in this country. 11% of Intel's workforce has just been laid off. Many people are saying this is because of the $15 minimum wage requirement, but the economic troubles go way beyond that here in the United States. They're saying the U.S. economy bubble will burst at any time because it is just built on utter fraud. And similarly, in China, their $1 trillion bond market is also built on total fraud. Again, it's all illusion here. Now, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, the second half of this push against the U.S. dollar, we know clearly that Saudi Arabia played a major role along with other countries. People are concentrating on Saudi Arabia now, but other countries were also involved in this. But the role of Saudi Arabia in 9/11 is finally being exposed. Even Obama's national security advisor, Ben Rhodes, said when it comes to 9/11, when it comes to Al-Qaeda, so a lot, quote, this is what he says, quote, so a lot of the money, that seed money, if you will, for what became Al-Qaeda came out of Saudi Arabia. He doesn't believe the government was actively trying to prevent this from happening. Again, even Obama's national security advisor saying Saudi Arabia, financed the 9/11 hijackers. 15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. They were flown out of this country on September 13th when no one was allowed to fly. And of course, the United States and Saudi Arabia have been financing radical Islamic terrorists for a number of years now, not only with Al-Qaeda, but they actively did it with ISIS inside of Syria in order to destabilize the secular government of Bashar al-Assad and overthrow him because he wasn't playing with U.S. foreign policy. He was also threatening U.S. hegemony around the world. But now with Saudi Arabia, ultimately threatening economic blackmail if their role is exposed from 9/11, the United States loses a key player in their U.S. hegemony because Saudi Arabia is now threatening to get rid of all of their money out of the United States, which would cripple the U.S. economy if their role in 9/11 is exposed. And this is all coming because 9/11 victims' family members are having a law in Congress that would allow them to sue Saudi Arabia for their role behind 9/11. And that's why Saudi Arabia is saying we're going to get all of our money out. And of course, this would have a devastating effect on the U.S. economy. Again, the United States is actively protecting the financiers, the people who did 9/11. It's an active cover-up. Paul Ryan and Barack Obama are opposing this bill. And their only justification for the cover-up of 9/11, the true criminals who made 9/11 happen, is, well, quote, if we let Americans sue Saudis for 9/11, foreigners will begin suing the United States nonstop. Again, just the most absurd statement by our president, saying, no, we can't expose how Saudi Arabia was a small part. Other countries also financed them, and other countries also had planning in 9/11, not just Saudi Arabia. But now Saudi Arabia is the main push, and now Barack Obama is going even to the extent saying, no, we can't sue them for doing 9/11. We have to cover them up. We have to protect the criminals who created the largest terrorist attack on American soil. This is just clear. The 9/11 truthers, I have been out there in the streets saying this. Since 2004 in the streets, I've been spat at. I've been called a crazy conspiracy theorist. I've been saying all along, we have been lied to about 9/11. The government is covering up what actually happened, and this is full proof. If you needed more proof, you are crazy. This is it. 9/11 has just been blown out of the water, and these Saudis, they pay off these politicians, and it's clear. Saudi Arabia has given millions of dollars to this criminal Hillary Clinton, who will be the next president of the United States because the game is rigged for her. And now Saudi Arabia, which has given her millions and millions of dollars, even before years ago, Hillary Clinton, it's been exposed through her leaked emails that she was selling weapons to Saudi Arabia when she was Secretary of State, allowing cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia, arming their horrible war criminal path in Yemen. Meanwhile, she went on stage and said, no, Bashar al-Assad is bad for using barrel bombs in Syria. Meanwhile, she's financing and giving barrel bombs to Saudi Arabia, which is using them against the people of Yemen. Again, there's no criticism by the U.S. government, by the U.S. media against Saudi Arabia because they are paid and bought off by these rich families. And again, with Saudi Arabia now losing America as their key ally, with this conflict with Saudi Arabia, the prompting up of the petrodollar, with the new Chinese-backed currency, with Russia going against the U.S. petrodollar worldwide, the U.S. hegemony is at its death throes. It is almost over, which will have huge economic ramifications here because we're seeing an economic warfare unfold, blow up right in front of our face with China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and now going against the U.S. dollar. Will the U.S. dollar collapse? It's only a matter of time. When this will happen, I do not know. Let me know in the comment section below what you're seeing through your research. Of course, all the links to all the research will be in the description below. Subscribe, and if you are interested, check out our sponsor, Healthy Emergency Storable Food with GMO-free ingredients. We have special exclusive offers for the We Are Change audience that you should check out at wearechange.org/store. Buying these products will help support this independent news organization to be run for you and by you. And also you can buy a product that will help you, that we truly do believe in, that we tested ourselves. Subscribe. We're going to have a lot more important geopolitical information that you won't see anywhere else here on youtube.com/wearechange.
wearechange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, if I can get this article up here. This, again, is from Zero Hedge. Stocks stumble as silver soars into bull market. Dollar hits 10-month lows. It says here, we get the clear impression today that we heard this from the depths of the Essel's building, as earnings offer little to no support whatever here. And it has the S&P charts. And I know you can't see the charts. It's also got the NASDAQ, S&P. It's got the Jang. energy and financials. Let me try to get down here past these. But gold and silver have been going up, even though they've dropped off a little bit. They're still going up. In 2016, they jumped up. They dropped down to about where the middle of 2015 was, but we're already where we're at, and they're going to go back up. Since January, I think silver's gone up 25% or something like that. But go to Zero Hedge, look for stocks stumble, silver soars, bull market. They have all the maps there, and if you want to know where things are headed, if you're looking at these charts and you put it along with what Russia, China, and these other countries are doing, along with the threats from Saudi Arabia, which, if you think that other countries want to trade in gold-backed currency, Saudi Arabia might just go, hey, we're just going to go ahead and start switching over to the yuan. Sorry, I'm having all kinds of little issues here. Hopefully we can get this worked out. That should do it. Okay. Now, if I can pull this other article up, just give me a second. And this is out of the economic collapse blog.com. And this is another signal that maybe we're not headed in a good direction right now. This one's titled, Corporations Are Defaulting on Their Debts Like It's 2008 All Over Again. Says the Dow closed above 18,000 on Monday for the first time since July. Isn't that great news? I truly wish it was. If the Dow actually reflected economic reality, I could stop writing about economic collapse and start blogging about cats and football. Unfortunately, the stock market and the economy are moving in two completely different directions right now. Even as stock prices soar, big corporations are defaulting on their debt at a level that we have not seen since the last financial crisis. In fact, this wave of debt defaults have become so dramatic that even USA Today is reporting on it. Get ready to step over some landmines, investors. The number of companies defaulting on their debt is hitting levels not seen since the financial crisis, and it's not just a problem for bondholders. So far this year, 46 companies have defaulted on their debt, the highest level since 2009, according to the S&P rating services. 5 companies defaulted this week based on the latest data available from S&P rating services. That includes New Jersey-based specialty chemical company Vertelis Specialties and Ohio-based iron ore producer Cliffs Natural. Of the world's defaults this year, 37 are of companies based in the U.S. Meanwhile, coal producer Peabody Energy, BTU, and surfwear seller Pacific Sunwear, PSUN, this week filed plans for bankruptcy protection. Shares of Peabody have dropped 97% over the past year to $2 a share, and Pacific Sunwear stock is off 98% to 4 cents a share. A lot of big companies in this country have fallen on hard times, and it looks like bankruptcy attorneys are going to be absolutely swamped with work for the foreseeable future. So why are stock prices soaring right now? After all, it doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. And it isn't just a few bad apples that we are talking about. All across the spectrum, corporate revenues and corporate earnings are down. At this point, earnings for companies on the S&P 500 have plunged a total of 18.5% from their peak in late 2014, and is being projected that corporate earnings overall will be down 8.5% for the first quarter of 2016 compared to 1 year ago. As earnings decline, a lot of big companies are getting into trouble with debt, and we have already seen a very large number of corporate debt downgrades. In recent interviews, I have been bringing up the fact that the average rating on the U.S. corporate debt has now fallen to BB, which is already lower than it was at any point during the last financial crisis. A lot of people don't seem to believe me when I share the fact, but it is absolutely true. One of the big reasons why corporate debt is being downgraded is because of a lot of these big companies have been going into enormous amounts of debt in order to buy back their own stock. The following ones from Wolf Richer. Downgrades ascribed to shareholder compensation as Moody's calls share buybacks and dividends have been soaring, according to John Lonsky, chief economist at Moody's Capital Market Research. The moving 12-month sum of Moody's credit rating downgrades of U.S. companies jumped from 32 in March 2015 to 48 in December 2015 to 61 March 2016, nearly doubling within a year. The last time the number of downgrades attributed to financial engineering reached 61 was in early 2007. It would hit its peak of 79 in mid-2007, a few months before the beginning of the Great Recession in Q4 2007. At the time, stocks were on the verge of commencing their epic crash. When corporations go into the market and buy back their own stock, they are slowly cannibalizing themselves. But we have seen these stock buybacks soar to record levels for a couple of reasons. Number one, big investors want to see stock prices go up, and so big investors tend to really like these stock buybacks and will generally support corporate executives that wish to engage in doing this. Number two, if you are a greedy corporate executive that is heavily compensated by stock options, you very much want to see the stock price go up as well. So the name of the game is greed, and stock buybacks have been fueling much of the rise in the U.S. stock prices that we have been seeing recently. However, the truth is that nothing in the financial world lasts forever, and the irrational bubble will ultimately come to an end as well. The article goes on. You can go ahead and read it there. That's at the economiccollapseblog.com. Okay. Now I have one more. And this one is coming out of AMTV, Christopher Green, The Truth About the Economic Collapse. And I'm not going to play all of this one. I will cut it off early, but I did want to play the beginning portion of this. So we'll go ahead and dive into it.
This is our sponsor, Infidel Body Armor, right now. Get the AMTV Armor Kit Special, because it's sick. Save big. Get the Viper Modular Operator Plate Carrier, your choice of color, Infidel Level 3 curved armor plates, 10 by 12 inch, front and back AR-500 steel, with 1/4 inch build-up standard, tactical trauma individual first aid kit, and AR-15 magazine pouches, enough to hold 6 30-round magazines. Infidel Body Armor just won't quit. Call 1-888-608-6605. That's 1-888-608-6605. Or click the link below right now. Lifetime warranty, free shipping. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green, and you're watching AMTV, Alternative Media Television. Today is April 19, 2016, post-tax day. And make sure you keep paying the tax man so that they can go invade all these countries on your behalf. Destroy the world. Economic collapse, which is what this video is about. The truth about the economic collapse. And this video isn't about fear, because this channel isn't about fear. It's about knowledge. You know, there's a saying, a maxim, knowledge is power. I actually think that's a misconception. Rather, I think mastery of knowledge is power. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. So I went out to the bookstore today, bought about 10 books. Need to pick up on my reading, need more knowledge, because there's this misconception that knowledge is power, but really mastery of that knowledge is power. You know, we could argue that we could have seen the 2008 and 2009 financial crash coming because there was a bubble, because things had exploded, because there was all this debt. House prices were tripling across the country. There was this easy credit. It was actually kind of, in hindsight, easy to see. They say hindsight is 20/20. Now we're repeating the same mistakes that were committed before by the criminal banksters and institutions like the private Federal Reserve. And the problem has only compounded. The Federal Reserve now has over $4.5 trillion on its balance sheet, courtesy and as direct consequence and result of all these bailouts, funny money, quantitative easing into infinity, Operation Twist, 0% interest rates, what I believe soon to be negative interest rates. We even see a boom in housing once again. We see this especially in the high-flying cities like San Francisco and New York. Real estate is booming. But eventually, it'll trough again, because that's how markets work. It's cycles, right? Nothing goes up in a straight line forever. Eventually, there's going to be a collapse, just like there were in the 1930s, there was in the 1930s, just like there was in 2008, 2009. And nothing has changed. The problem has only compounded. The national debt in this country has doubled under the administration of Barack Obama. That's how insane this actually is.
The way we're going to win over the long term is not just militarily. We've got to win over hearts and minds. And what that means is we've got to invest in countries that have no educational infrastructure and have no means for young people to get ahead. We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
So here's what I think is going to happen, in my humble opinion. And I'm not a crystal ball reader, but this is how I see it unfolding. I don't think that they can collapse the U.S. stock markets, equities, bonds, the dollar, until we get through this election in 2016, because it actually favors Hillary Rodham Clinton. Hillary, by the way, have you noticed how sick she is lately with their coughing fits?
Well, I don't think so. There is a lot of oppression against women that we have to address. Excuse me. Sorry. Allergy season.
That's a killer.
Right?
How do you guys do it?
Any mouth CPR? You all right?
Did you just try to kiss?
Senator, you coughing like you got some medicinal.
Yeah, I need some. There's always the threat of sexism and unfair treatment. But you've got to learn to deal with it, which I have over the years. And my voice is failing here. Excuse me.
I mean, I'm not trying to make fun of her, honestly, because I don't wish ill will on anyone, even though I despise people like Hillary Clinton, but she's very, very sick. Honestly, very, very sick. They cannot collapse the U.S. equity markets, stock markets around the world, the dollar, until she's cemented as the next president, in my humble opinion. We got to get through that. So we're hitting Dow 18,000 again. We were there before, but now we're headed back. I think we could see as high as Dow 20,000 in the not too distant future before the inevitable collapse. But they've got to cement the next president. Now, we know the establishment wants Hillary Rodham Clinton. We know that they're anti-Donald Trump. They're anti all of these outsiders, whether or not it's Trump or it's Bernie Sanders. Because again, Donald Trump does not cement the New World Order integration. He's not a part of that plan. He's an outsider. He's a corporate insider, but he's a political outsider. He's an establishment outsider. When it comes to the big picture, okay, we're talking global politics, the East versus the West, all these wars we've been fighting, etc. So they need to cement Hillary Clinton in power before the shit hits the fan. And honestly, it doesn't even matter. Even if Donald Trump upsets Hillary Clinton, there's a coup in Washington, D.C., it's still going to come crashing and burning once that next president, whoever it is cemented. This is a part of the agenda. Again, these oligarchical families like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Carnegies. This is all about destroying sovereign governments, bringing down borders. I talked about this in the last video. The engineering of not just the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, but also the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, courtesy of the false flag event that made up September 11, 2001. This is what the economic collapse looks like. It's why there was the wealth transfer in 2008 and 2009. Funnel all the money to the top, upper echelon, 0.001%, before you usher in the New World Order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
And that agenda. And you collapse the dollar. It's the same reason the United States, through its intelligence agencies, it can't be trusted at all. They're actually working against the American people right now because we've been hijacked. The country has been taken over by these radicals, are throwing countries like Saudi Arabia under the bus, once puppet states to the U.S. government, because they need someone to blame for the collapse of the dollar. Do you understand that? That's the reason. That's why they're throwing Saudi Arabia under the bus. It's not to really pin, quote unquote, Saudi Arabia as being responsible or for their involvement in the 9/11 terror attacks. I mean, of course we know they were involved. Anybody with a thinking brain that's done any research knows that, just like they know that the United States was involved and that it was an inside job, hit job by the CIA, that the alleged terrorists on the planes were patsies. Everybody knows this. Everybody understands this. The plane that was allegedly crashed into the ground, what was it, outside Pennsylvania, brought down by American heroes or whatever, that was intended, I think, in my humble opinion, for Building 7. But because that failed and the third plane didn't hit New York City, they just demolished it through a engineered demolition because it was all wired up with bombs.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
You gotta get back from here.
I know that. You gotta get back. All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
Tell my sister I'm okay.
What happened?
He was in an explosion. He was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
Like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the plan, probably?
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs. And on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew.
Yeah, there was people on the streets, by the way, that heard that. They heard the explosions at the World Trade Center buildings, the ones that actually were hit before the planes hit. Not my opinion, just facts on the ground. But hey, let's ignore the facts because, again, this propaganda brainwashing is so powerful and so strong, it's difficult to think for ourselves. I was talking with a friend of mine who has children the other day about our educational system, about schooling, which really is just statist mind control. That's what it is. It's brainwashing of our children at an early age.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Get them indoctrinated into the system, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, learning about the President of the United States. Not that there's anything wrong with patriotism or anything like that, but it is mind control. It is psychological warfare. It is brainwashing of our youth so they can go work in a cubicle and be replaced by robots. Notice how none of that's worked? Following that quote-unquote direction that the elites want you to follow, go through corporate America, go work in a cubicle. How well has that worked out for most people? It's been a giant... Everybody successful, just look around you, doing anything powerful, who's very, very successful, at least my friends, family members, people that I know, have opted out of the paradigm completely. A lot of them dropped out of college. I mean, look at the tech billionaires. A lot of them didn't even graduate because they're the innovators. Again, they're thinking outside the box. This isn't all about pessimism. This is about knowledge. Knowledge is power, but I believe that's a misconception. I believe mastery of knowledge is power. We put out a very great report, valuable report, and it's free. We put this out in a video that I put out 2 videos ago. Donald Trump warns of massive economic collapse 2016. I'll put a link in the description box, put it on the screen. You can download it for free. It gives you some valuable insight, information on things I'm doing. I penned along with Swiss America, our partners, on how I'm protecting myself and my family, taking initiative now before these economic bubbles burst. Again, not just knowledge is power, mastery of knowledge is power. Interest rates continue to go lower. In fact, we could actually see the 30-year mortgage, for example, hit brand new lows, in my opinion. In some countries around the world that are experiencing negative interest rates, NIRP, we've gone from ZIRP, 0% interest rates, to NIRP now, negative interest rates, are actually being paid interest to take out a mortgage. Yeah, that's right. It's so freaking crazy and outlandish. When we turn to negative interest rates, for example, say here in the United States, the banks will actually pay you to take out the mortgage. They'll be like, here you go. Here's an interest payment for taking out this loan, for taking out the debt. That's how freaking insane it is. Of course, in that same negative interest rate environment, you'll pay the bank to store your own money. Instead of getting an interest return, you'll pay the bank to store your $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000 or whatever that is. But you'll actually be paid to take on more debt. Because again, that oils the system. It's all a part of the brainwashing propaganda campaign that makes up this statist agenda. You got to keep the sheeple moving in the same direction, drinking the Kool-Aid. Buying cars, buying houses, buying shit they don't need to impress people that they don't like. It's part of the agenda. It's what keeps America going. So the dollar is going to collapse. Okay, it's in process now. People tell me this all the time. They're like, I guarantee you, Christopher, mark my words, we'll be at war with Russia by the end of the year. Newsflash, we already are. Okay, have you seen the fighter jets, the Russian fighter jets buzzing U.S. warships recently?
Below the bridgeway.
In the Baltic Sea, we're already at war. We don't need a quote-unquote official declaration. We are at war. This plays into the dollar bubble, the collapse of the dollar, the economic environment as it is today. And the U.S. has to blame somebody. The U.S. and her politicians are never, and her banksters are never responsible for anything going wrong. Keep that in mind. It's never their fault. It's entirely out of their control. And then when they need you, they'll just steal from you. They'll take trillions of dollars worth of bailouts, even though they engineered and created the bubbles that went right back into their pockets. You see how it works? They need somebody to blame. And so they're going to blame Saudi Arabia. They're going to blame the demon that makes up Vladimir Putin, the next great Satan and the Hitler that we see in, Time magazine. And that propaganda put out by Western media. They're going to blame China. None of this is Russia or China's fault. Okay, Russia and China are just doing a better job than America is. That's the honest to God truth. We're rotten here in the United States. We are morally bankrupt. The country's been hijacked. We've created such an environment of debt servitude that there's no turning back. We can only kick the can down the road so far before the inevitability of a collapse, which is exactly what's going to happen, just like it happened in 2008, 2009, because we've only compounded the problem. Your politicians and banksters have compounded that problem, and they need somebody to blame.
Okay, I'm going to stop that right there. Christopher Green, AMTV. Go check him out. AMTV on YouTube. Subscribe. Now, a lot of us have been warning. I've been warning about this collapse for probably about a year and a half now. I've warned that the signs are there that we were headed towards one for about 2. The choices that we have been making basically was just creating another bubble. Ron Paul had hinted to this many of times, and when you start looking into it, hey, he's right. They're creating another bubble. Again, it's just a scheme to get more money out of you without just stealing it from you, flat out. Just like a tax is. It's theft. Okay, you're stealing money from people that probably don't agree with what you're spending it on, or not spending it and just giving it to yourself. Whatever you're doing with it. But we'll kind of go from the economic side into something that he was talking about there towards the end. That's why I kind of wanted to stop it there. Plus, it was kind of a longer video. But this thing with Russia, there's 2 articles. One about Putin bolstering his subfleet. And Russia warns USA over naval incident as NATO tensions laid bare. I'm going to cover that one first. It was out of yahoo.com. Brussels. Russia accused the United States on Wednesday of intimidation by selling a U.S. naval destroyer close to Russia's border in the Baltics and warned that the Russian military would respond with all necessary measures to any future incidences. Speaking after a meeting between NATO's envoys and Russia, their first in almost 2 years, Moscow's ambassador to NATO said the April 11th maritime incident showed there could be no improvement in ties until the U.S.-led alliance withdrew from Russia's borders. This is about attempts to exercise military pressure on Russia, the envoy Alexander Grushko said. We will take all necessary measures, precautions to compensate for these attempts to use military force, he told reporters. U.S. Ambassador to NATO Douglas Lute pressed Russia about the incident, warning it had been dangerous. The United States said the guided missile destroyer USS Cook was on routine business near Poland when it was harassed by Russian jets. Quote, "We were in international waters," a NATO diplomat reported Lute as telling Grushko during the NATO-Russia Council meeting. Despite what officials said was a calm and professional meeting, the public comments highlighted the state of tension that persists between the sides since Moscow's annexation of Ukraine's Crimea in March 2014 and its support for separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the NATO member states had during the meeting rejected Grushko's account of the crisis in eastern Ukraine, where 9,000 people have died since April 2014. Stoltenberg said while there were profound disagreements over how to handle Europe's security, each side urgently needed to talk more and to use existing rules to reduce military risk. Stoltenberg suggested revamping a Cold War-era treaty known as the Vienna Document, which sets out the rules for large-scale exercises and other military activity, as well as telephone hotlines and other military communication channels. We have to use our lines of communication, he said. Russia's chief concern is NATO's biggest modernization since the Cold War, which is likely to include military buildup in Eastern Europe with a rotating multinational force in Poland and the Baltics. NATO says the plans are a proportionate response to Russian aggression following Moscow's annexation of Crimea, and the alliance had no forces in Eastern Europe before the Ukraine crisis. Poland and other NATO members in the Baltics worry about an increase in the Russian military presence in its Kaliningrad enclave, where Russia is positioning longer-range surface-to-air missiles. No agreement on Ukraine. The session of the NATO-Russia Council, which last met in June 2014, have been called in part to assuage Russia's concerns that it feels threatened by NATO, but core differences clearly remain afterwards. NATO envoys had expressed concern about Russia's so-called snap exercises, where thousands of Russian troops carry out war games without any prior warning. That is clearly destabilizing, a NATO diplomat said. Stoltenberg said NATO members had rejected Grusko's description of a crisis in eastern Ukraine as a civil war. In the meeting, it was reconfirmed that we disagree on the facts, on the narrative, and the responsibilities in and around Ukraine, Stoltenberg said after the meeting. Many allies disagree when Russia tries to portray this as a civil war. This is Russia destabilizing eastern Ukraine, providing support for the separatists, munitions, funding, equipment, and also command and control, he said. So there were profound disagreements, he said. Russia denies any direct involvement in eastern Ukraine. And now we have Putin bolstering his submarine out of New York Times. Russia bolsters its submarine fleet and tensions with the U.S. rise. Naples, Italy, Russia attacked submarines, the most in 2 decades, are prowling the coastlines of Scandinavia and Scotland, the Mediterranean Sea, and the North Atlantic, in what Western military officials say is a significant increased presence aimed at contesting American and NATO undersea dominance. Admiral Mark Ferguson of the United States Navy's top command in Europe said last fall that the intensity of Russian submarine patrols had risen by almost 50% over the past year, citing public remarks by Russian Navy Chief Admiral Viktor Shirkov. Analysts say that tempo has not changed since then. The patrols are the most visible sign of a renewed interest in submarine warfare by President Vladimir Putin, whose government has spent billions of dollars for new classes of diesel nuclear-powered attack submarines that are quieter, better armed, and operated by more proficient crews than in the past. The tensions are part of an expanding rivalry and military buildup with echoes of the Cold War between the United States and Russia. Moscow is projecting force not only in the North Atlantic but in Syria and Ukraine, and building up its nuclear arsenal and cyber warfare capabilities in what American military officials say is an attempt to prove its relevance after years of economic decline and retrenchment. Independent American military analysts see the increased Russian submarine patrols as a legitimate challenge to the United States and NATO. Even short of tensions, there is the possibility of accidents and miscalculations, but whatever the threat, the Pentagon is also using the stepped-up Russian patrols as another argument for bigger budgets for submarines and anti-submarine warfare. American naval officials say that in short term, the growing number of Russian submarines with their ability to shadow Western vessels and European coastlines will require more ships, planes, and subs to monitor them. In the long term, the Defense Department has proposed $8.1 billion over the next 5 years for undersea capabilities, including 9 new Virginia-class attack submarines that can carry up to 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles, more than triple the capacity now. We are back to the great powers competition, Admiral John M. Richardson, the chief of naval operations, said in an interview. Last week, unarmed Russian warplanes repeatedly buzzed a Navy destroyer in the Baltic Sea and at one point came within 30 feet of the warship. American officials said last year some of Russia's new diesel submarines launched 4 cruise missiles at targets in Syria. Mr. Putin's military modernization program also includes new intercontinental ballistic missiles as well as aircraft, tanks, and air defense systems. To be sure, there is hardly parity between the Russian and American submarine fleets. Russia has about 45 attack submarines, about 24 are nuclear powered, and 20 are diesel, which are designed to sink other submarines or ships, collect intelligence, and conduct patrols. But Western naval analysis say that only about half of those are able to deploy at any given time. Most stay closer to home and maintain an operational tempo far below a Cold War peak. The United States has 53 attack submarines, all nuclear powered, as well as 4 other nuclear powered submarines that carry cruise missiles and special operational forces. At any given time, roughly a third of America's attack submarines are at sea, either on patrols or training, with the others undergoing maintenance. American Navy officials said, and Western analysis say that American attack submarines, which are made for speed, endurance, and stealth to deploy far from American shores, remain superior to their Russian counterparts. The Pentagon is also developing sophisticated technology to monitor encrypted communications from Russian submarines and new kinds of remotely controlled and autonomous vessels. Members of the NATO alliance, including Britain, Germany, and Norway, are at the same time buying or considering buying new submarines in response to the Kremlin's projection of force in the Baltic and Arctic. But Moscow's recently revised national security and maritime strategies emphasizes the need for Russian maritime forces to project power and to have access to the broader Atlantic Ocean as well as the Arctic. Russian submarines and spy ships now operate near the vital undersea cables and carry almost all global internet communications, raising concerns among some American military intelligence officials that the Russians could attack those lines in time of tension or conflict. Russia is also building an undersea unmanned drone capable of carrying a small tactical nuclear weapon to use against harbors or coastal areas. American military and intelligence analysis said. And like the United States, Russia operates larger nuclear-powered submarines that carry long-range nuclear missiles and spend months at a time hiding in the depths of the ocean. Those submarines, although lethal, do not patrol like the attack submarines do and do not pose the same degree of concern to American naval officials. Analysis say that Moscow's continued investment in attack submarines is in contrast to the quality of many of Russia's land and air force that frayed in the post-Cold War era. In the Russian naval structure, submarines are the crown jewels for naval combat, said Magnus Nordenman, director of the Atlantic Council's Transatlantic Security Initiative in Washington. The U.S. and NATO haven't focused on anti-submarine operations lately, and they've let the skill deteriorate. That has allowed for a rapid Russian resurgence, Western and American officials say, partly in response to what they say is Russia's fear of being hemmed in. I don't think many people understand the visceral way Russia views NATO and the European Union as an existential threat, Admiral Ferguson said in an interview. And you can read the rest of that. That was at NewYorkTimes.com. Russia bolsters its submarine fleet and tensions with the U.S. rise. And we're going to probably continue to see this definitely with the fight over the petrodollar, and we're going to see more tensions between Russia, China, Saudi, and who knows else. Okay. Let me pull this up here. Sorry, give me a second here. Okay, it's not one to pull up here. Give me a second. Okay, I gotta fix something here. Let me try to pull this clip up I was gonna play here in a minute. This was a Ron Paul Liberty Report, and this is Enemies Everywhere, the U.S. War on the World.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Co-host Daniel McAdams with me today. Daniel, it's good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Guess what I want to talk about today? Foreign policy.
Oh.
And I have some complaints. But we're finding there's a few allies out there. It's interesting that sometimes progressives, Democrats, are more likely to say we shouldn't bomb the world. Of course, they would do something else with the money than we would. But we did find a couple people who are conservative libertarian types that think that we're too far stretched around the world. One is our old friend Pat Buchanan, who doesn't declare himself a libertarian, but he has some good instincts about war and involvement around the world. His article was America's Imperial Overstretch, and that's probably an understatement. And he goes into a lot of details explaining where are we. You know, we've talked about all these places, but when you put them in a list, there's a lot of places where we've been, like every place in the world. But the other one is Phil Giraldi, who wrote an interesting article that says the war against the world, and that's about it. And sometimes I think it's a war against ourselves and against the American people because the consequence is so great. When it comes to expensive loss of civil liberties and making ourselves less safe. So it's a world, I would add, the war against the world and the American people, But I know you've looked at these two articles. Any one thing that struck you as being, I know it's not a total surprise, but what was about these articles that was sort of impressive with you?
Well, what's surprising to me is the disconnect between two astute analysts like Buchanan and Giraldi, and the mainstream media, which reports purely the way the White House wants them to. There were last week there was an overflight. The USS Donald Cook was in the Baltic Sea. It was 50 miles from Russian territory. The Russians had overflown with Sukhoi fighters over 20 times, and they were ignored. And they finally overflew at a very close range. And of course, that was videotaped and put on the U.S. media. Look at how bad the Russians are misbehaving. And Buchanan pointed out, they sent a message. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
Why do you have an Aegis combat equipped U.S. ship within 50 miles of the Russian border?
You know, I thought that simple question was so crucial and just described it so well. What are we doing there? What's our government doing there? What is the purpose of this? And there's no easy answer for that, because if you suggest a few, they'll say, "Oh, you're just a conspiracy nut," and then they're going back to the old thing. Oh, they might describe you as an American first person. Yeah. Well, maybe that's better than being an American second person. You know, maybe we ought to think about our own country, our own national defense, and staying out of wars. So,
you know, this event took place, let's just line it up, took place 50 miles from Russia, 5,000 miles from the U.S., yet it was Russian aggression acting 50 miles. And, you know, what's interesting, I was reading an article that Russian Insider put up, and the Polish media is covering this pretty extensively because the Donald Cook originally left out of Poland going up to Lithuania before it had these exercises. But, and I mentioned earlier, it was equipped with the Aegis combat systems. Those are missiles that target the Russian nuclear and non-nuclear missiles on the land, sea, and the air. And they conducted these exercises for 2 days with a fully equipped Aegis system. And Chatham House, which is a think tank in London, extremely well-respected mainstream think tank, it said that the operation appeared to the Russians as a simulated attack on Kaliningrad, which you could see it as, and they would obviously view it as a threat when the U.S. has these missiles capable of taking out the Russian military right on the border. So, you know, it's obvious that they would think of it this way. Here's one analyst. He said, "quote, nothing the Aegis armed missile battery does within Russia can be considered routine at any time." So they're operating off the coast of Russia with these Aegis systems that are targeting Russia, and yet when the Russia response happens, they say that it's Russian aggression. So this is just it's a fascinating event that happened in the Baltic Sea.
Not only at the Baltic Sea, it's all around the world.
Yeah. Well, we had, just before we started recording, I looked up a headline that we both laughed at. It said, "The U.S. is protesting Chinese action in the South China Sea." So it's actually quite funny. And this has to do with the islands that the Chinese have constructed. And it's causing a bit of an uproar in the region because the other countries are not that happy about it. But then again, how many thousands of miles is it from the U.S.? But it's a great opportunity for the U.S. to expand its military and its naval presence. As a matter of fact, the U.S. announced that it's going to be regularly rotating in troops and equipment into the Philippines continuously. So this is a place where we left after the Cold War. The idea that we needed a presence there was diminished after the end of the Cold War. And now all of a sudden, because the Chinese are in the South China Sea conducting activities, that's an excuse for us to go and get involved and put more troops in the Philippines, which of course will be considered a hostile act for the Chinese.
Well, when Carter went before Congress to testify always for more money, which is routine, he said there are 5 major things that threaten us. One is terrorism, North Korea, they're a threat to us, China and Russia, as well as Iran. So, but the whole purpose there is just to get more money for the military. It's routine. They do it all the time.
Yeah, and Phil Giraldi pointed out in his article, and I think it is significant, that Ashton Carter is not a military person. He's never been in the military. Not that you must be in the military to be a defense secretary, but he comes from the defense contractor side. His career is made in military contracting. We call the Beltway bandits, who always think up new threats and new excuses for the latest gadgets and the latest military equipment. So he comes before the Senate last month and he says, we've got these 5 new threats. Don't you dare think about sequestration because we've got to meet these threats. We are under threat. And that's where he comes from, because he comes from the world of defense and military contracting.
And the odds of us ever getting somebody in that position that wouldn't have close ties with the military-industrial complex, slim to none, no matter who is the president. But, you know, I wonder about this when they show all this concern, that they have a tremendous amount of insecurity if they believe that this is really a threat. And I think that's just, an argument. But it seems like if it's true, they're very insecure people, but also might represent what we talk about, the subsidies and the protection of the military-industrial complex. But then again, the people come around to this. You don't run in the Republican primary, even in the Democratic Party, and saying we're going to cut military spending. I mean, even the progressives, you don't hear we got to slash spending. They're all saying, all the candidates, we got to rebuild the military. But then the propaganda machine seems to win out all the time because people finally get scared. They say, well, they're going to attack us. We better do something about it.
And even if they don't mean it, whenever a candidate does step out of line, look at how he's crucified in the media. Bernie Sanders the other day questioned our blank check to Israel when you consider Israel's policies toward the settlements and the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. And it was a huge uproar. How dare he bring this up? Trump mentioned, what are we doing defending rich Europe with NATO? Regardless of what he's going to do, if it's good or not, look what happened. The neocons went crazy. How dare he criticize this wonderful alliance? So if you ever color out of the lines, you're so far extreme that you can't even be discussed.
Yeah, and this is not likely to change because I think things will get much worse, and then we'll run out of money and we'll go broke and we'll have to change. But for the time being, I think they're going to continue to spend the money and continue to aggravate and continue to scare the American people. And yet the American people are the ones that suffer. But, Pat made one suggestion about how to handle China, when they're aggravating us. He thought a good substitute would be just to put, tariffs on China. I don't happen to agree with that. I don't think that is a solution. But he was making a point that you don't have to start a war, but tariffs aren't much answer. And he said, well, maybe the American people would have to pay the bill by higher prices and they would grow not to like it. Well, I don't know if that's the case either because they'd have to put two and two together and that's not likely to happen. So I never see retaliation with trade between two nations that shouldn't be at war. That will solve much of a problem.
Maybe even a more novel approach would be, although we don't like the idea of direct democracy or democracy at all, but the thing about a nationwide referendum, do you want us to continue confronting China? If so, it's going to cost each household, $5,000. Please send your check in with your vote and see how that turns
Yeah, but
out.
see, that's why the gimmick of the way we finance war has been worked out a long time ago. Nobody, or whether it's a welfare benefit. The government can do it, and they are not going to raise taxes on the people who are going to receive anything. They're going to borrow the money or print the money and delay the payback. And sometimes you can delay this for a long time. Look at what our obligations now are. The entitlement system, $210 trillion and $19 trillion of debt. So they can delay all this and. But it'd be good if they knew what they were paying. Believe me, they would quit doing this rather quickly.
You can buy a new car, or you can pay for our aggression or our attitude toward China. But the thing is, I said before the show, it reminds me of two kids, and one is poking the other constantly, and then the one finally turns around and slugs him, and he says, "He hit me." The U.S. it had this incident in the Baltics. We've already said we're putting troops in eastern Poland on the Russian border. 2 years ago, the same USS Donald Cook was off the coast of Crimea and the Russian mainland, also conducting exercises against Russian military installations, targeting it in training exercises. The U.S. is involved in the South China Sea, where we have no business being. But yet every time there's a reaction to the U.S. military in these areas, it's never our fault. We're always just minding our own business, and they're saying, you're being aggressive, to the Russians, to the Chinese, to whoever.
And then we give you statistics. Our Navy is going to the dogs, and we need more military equipment all across the board. And it goes on and on. So
the Chinese will stop selling us stuff if we don't have our Navy in the South China Sea, as if that's going to happen.
Well, anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. And this is just more evidence that our foreign policy is a disaster. And we are finding some good people writing on this. But unfortunately, I don't think we should be optimistic enough to show that by the time this election is over, all of a sudden our foreign policy is going to change because there's limits to what you can say, and the powers to be just won't let you tell them the truth about what to be doing with our foreign policy. And they always couch this in terms of obligation. Yes, we're the policemen of the world, to protect our interests, but they claim that we have this moral obligation to do it. Who else is going to be the exceptional nation to settle disputes and take care of everybody if America doesn't step up to the plate? And that, of course, is an arrogance which it doesn't sell well around the world and will lead us into a lot of trouble. And that's why I think we're in a lot of trouble right now, is because of this attitude. It has nothing to do with defense. It has to do with an aggressive foreign policy, us throwing our weight around, a foreign policy of intervention involved in the internal affairs of other nations, and believing that we can go to any spot in the world. And no matter what they say or do, it's their fault, not our fault. If they shoot back, then they're the aggressors. It makes no sense whatsoever. So hopefully we can continue in this program to point out the imperfections of our foreign policy and get the American people to join us, and to make sure our elected leaders know and understand and would consider a non-interventionist foreign policy. That, I think, would be the step in the right direction for seeking peace and prosperity throughout the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.
Okay, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Subscribe. And that really kind of sums up where we are in this whole thing. We go around the world patrolling all the seas, but, when other countries do it, we make propaganda out of it. And sorry, I'm having some issues here, if you couldn't hear already. Okay, hopefully this works out here for the time being, as long as my computer doesn't completely freak out on me. Which it could at any moment. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. Oh, excuse me. I have one here from the Libertarian Republic I wanted to cover. And this one, it's titled The Libertarian Party, the Good, Bad, Ugly, and Optimistic. Second generation libertarian speaks out about growing up libertarian, leaving the party, and coming back. I had the distinct pleasure of speaking to the Libertarian Party of Minnesota State Convention this past weekend. They invited me as a keynote, interested in my perspective on Libertarian Party activism, as I've done a lot of it and have what they described as a unique perspective on the matter. Video has not yet been released of my speech, which is fine with me, as I'm not known. Excuse me, give me a second here. Stupid pop-up ads. Okay, I think I got them all here. Said, I'm not known for great public speaking skills, but I did write the speech. So for this, those who wish to know what insights I was able to present, the transcript is below, altered slightly for a reading audience. To start some context, I want to give a bit of context to my billing as a second-generation libertarian, as that could mean a lot of things. Libertarian doesn't tell you much about who my parents are, what they did, or how I really experienced the party itself in my youth. So let's be clear, my parents were activists. They were interested in objectivism and became libertarians during the LP's founding. They went to see Anne Ryan and Nathaniel Brandon speak at universities in New England. My father drove LP vice presidential nominee Tony Nathan around to speeches in New England during the 1972 Hotspurs campaign. My mother made dinner for Murray Rothbard when he'd come to our house because Dad had booked him to speak at local venues in New Hampshire. They knew Roger Leigh McBride in the same context as well. My parents named my older brother Ragnar from the book Atlas Shrugged. My parents were homeschoolers, pagan petition gathering, Heinlein quoting libertarians. Both of my parents ran for local government offices as libertarians in the 1970s. My mother convinced my grandfather, a World War II vet, to join the party and run for Congress in 1976. My dad ran for Congress and my mother ran for governor of New Hampshire in 1984 on the LP ticket. I tell you this to give you a context of what I mean when I describe myself as a second generation. That's where I come from. That's what's in my blood. I feel like I've tried to run away from it at times and I can't get away. It's led to many experiences within the libertarian movement, some positive, some negative. My topic is the good, the bad, the ugly, and the optimistic. So I'm going to share with you a couple of stories about what it's like to grow up in the environment, the tough experiences, how it impacted me, and why I'm optimistic about the future. My first story starts in 96 when I was 9, and it's election season in New Hampshire. I can see the political ads on television and the signs all over people's yards. One day I asked my mother, who are we voting for, Mr. Clinton or Mr. Dole? Mom looks at me pointedly and says, neither represent us. We're voting for Harry Brown. Well, that does it for this 9-year-old. I am a Harry Brown supporter as of this moment. Election day rolls around, and Mom and I go to the polling place at the local school. Mom goes to cast her vote, and I go to cast mine in the kids' ballot box. The kids' ballot doesn't even show Harry Brown on it. I walk out to the poll volunteer standing nearby, who is about 102 years old, and I say, excuse me, but this ballot is missing a name. She lets me write him in. I cast my kids' vote, which there's schools that do that. They're fake elections for the kids. The morning the election results came out, I grabbed the newspaper and looked to see if Harry Brown would be our next president. I saw the votes total listed with Clinton, Dole, and Perot. And then I realized Harry Brown didn't even get 1%. He received less than 500,000 votes that year. That's when I learned that I was on the losing team. That's when I learned that what it felt like to be a political minority. Before that, I had no idea people didn't think like my family did. I assumed we all wanted whatever it was my parents wanted, to get the government out of our business, out of our lives, and stand up against corruption and wars and taxes. Why would we be on the losing team? Why would these ideas possibly be unpopular? My second story starts in 2003. I'm 15 years old. And in my second year of college, George W. Bush was just declared war with Iraq. My friend's older brother signs up to go liberate Iraqis. He comes back with his leg liberated from his body. I began attending anti-war rallies in New England. I began writing in a blog on LiveJournal about the evils of war and the idea that America could be engaging in terrorism too. For what is more terrifying than a campaign of shock and awe? I am also taking an ethics class. Over the course of the semester, we debate about the origins and differences between morality, ethics, legality, and I am always the advocate against enforcing pretty much any of my moral perspectives. People tend to think I am a moral relativist, but I just have very few moral absolutes that I feel others need to share. I tell my classmates about the ideas of the philosophy of self-ownership. I explained that it is immoral to use force to achieve social and political goals. It was during this time that I found conservatives to be my enemy. Excuse me. Okay. Okay. Oh, I had to blow my nose. Sorry. Said found conservatives to be my enemy. They were Republicans and Bush supporters, pro-war and anti-choice. I was on the pro-choice side of a debate regarding abortion one day in class, and I said, once you've added government, or rather a gun, to the equation, you have taken away all moral choice. Morality cannot exist at the point of a gun. My professor told me afterwards that he wasn't surprised I was quoting Ayn Rand, but I was surprised. My mother always said that I just assumed it was something she came up with. This is something that can happen when you are raised within the movement. You pick up a book like The Fountainhead or Man Economy in the State, and you think, wait, did I read this already? Because it always feels really familiar. It's all stuff you were raised in. In the summer of 2004, I spent time in New York protesting the war, and I volunteered on the Badenoch campaign for president, holding signs and gathering petitions in New Hampshire. That was my first official Libertarian Party activism. But I was surrounded by liberals who were also protesting the war, who also hated the Bush administration. While talking about gay rights and smoking pot, we marched together, Badenoch and Kerry supporters, against the Republican National Convention in New York City the last day of August 2004. This is when I began to believe that liberals or the left could be natural allies to the Libertarian Party. I found people who felt as strongly as I did about the war, or that the war was wrong, the women's rights mattered, and that pot should be legalized. My third story, I was elected vice chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire in 2006. When I was 19 years old, I held that position until 2008. During my time on the executive committee, I wanted to get more young people like myself to become activists, but it was hard. There were people who came to every monthly meeting who had been there when they founded the party, and they didn't like change or coalitions or young whippersnappers like myself trying to do new things or appeal to other people. It was in November 2007 to January 2008 that Ron Paul was really making noise in the Republican Party leading up to the New Hampshire primary. I suddenly heard a conservative talking about anti-war, pro-privacy, and being against the USA Patriot Act. This was exciting, and I volunteered for his campaign. This was the Ron Paul revolution. I went knocking on doors, canvassing, and holding signs on primary day. One of my fellow party members spotted me working for Ron Paul, and he was furious. At the next executive meeting, he called me out, suggesting I should be removed from my position as vice chair of the LP of New Hampshire because I was supporting a Republican. To be fair, I guess that's a valid reason. However, there's a bit of context to Ron Paul, who in 1988 was the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. But this was a thing that the Libertarian Party and in the movement in general, we eat our own. Sign that you're a former LP executive. This was a tweet and a pin. Executive committee member. You get triggered every time you hear someone mention Robert's Rules of Order. The controversy blew over. I retained my seat, but I was really upset about it. Ron Paul's campaign died out, and I went back to focusing on LP politics. Then at the Libertarian National Convention, Bob Barr was nominated as LP's candidate for president. Bob Barr, a former Republican who co-sponsored DOMA, who tried to ban Wicca from the U.S. military and who had been in favor of the drug war. After all the poop, we'll put it in that term, I received for supporting Ron Paul, this was a guy I was supposed to support in the party of principle. So I did what I've been taught just a few months earlier. It was time to eat our own. I and a few other people led the charge within the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire to refuse to accept the nomination of Bob Barr and to consider affiliation from the national LP. We collected our own petitions for our own candidate who would only be on the ballot in New Hampshire. That man's name is George Phillies. It was a noble cause, but it was fruitless, and it was a complete and utter waste of our time, energy, and resources. I didn't run for re-election as vice chair for the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire that year, though party members tried to draft me as a chair. This was when I gave up on the Libertarian Party. This was the point when I decided that for all the noble things that were said, the party was a waste of time, of energy, and of resources, that it chewed up and spit out energetic young believers like myself and left us bitter and resentful and cynical that liberty could ever be achieved in our lifetime. It was classic burnout. I felt defeated. This was where I was in 2008 in terms of LP politics. I was the child of activists who didn't know why we didn't have President Harry Brown in 96, but started to become clear. It felt like we didn't even want to succeed. We were too busy tearing each other down, killing any coalitions. The major parties didn't even need to bother. I was tired of giving myself to this party. There's a way of thinking called a crab mentality, which is metaphor for articulate the idea of if I can't have it, neither can you. It's referring to a bucket of crabs and how when any crab tries to climb out, the others pull it back down in this useless king of the hill competition that prevents any from escaping. In humans, this is envy, jealousy, sabotage, and competition. And we see it all the time. We see it in the libertarianism a lot. So I gave up. To be clear, I was still a libertarian, but I just figured I should find some other way to go about it. I didn't know other activists doing liberty stuff outside the party besides a couple of movers in the Free State Project. But they were mostly LPers too, so I actually just got more involved in my own community. I made friends who weren't libertarians and actually participated in a community that helped each other out. When people got sick or had babies or had a house burned down, I know it's weird, by the way, most libertarians are happy to meet other libertarians, but I grew up in it. It was exciting to meet non-libertarians. It was a learning experience to walk away, to let go, and just be free. Not because I'd won my freedom from the government, but because I was ignoring the government's existence. I had accepted it. I just stopped fighting it. I was avoiding it in agorist ways by buying and selling stuff on the internet or within community. I was simply avoiding the attention of the government while violating its various laws. Honestly, that whole experience healed my soul. So my fourth story, in 2011, I was spending a lot of time in Las Vegas gambling professionally and partying in nightclubs, listening to electronic dance music. My roommate was a stripper who had never paid taxes. She didn't think of it as some FU to the government. She just lived outside the world where people get W-2s or file 1040s. I'd always been an advocate for sex workers' rights and a less Puritan society in general, but I really spent a lot of time with dancers and prostitutes and escorts and porn stars, and I saw the devastating effect the law had on some of these people's livelihoods. I realized that for all the avoiding of the government we can do, we still sometimes need to stand up and fight against further regulation of our bodies and lives. We can't just hope the government doesn't notice us. The Libertarian Party has generally been on the correct side of this issue. Liberals were sort of my allies on the subject more so than most conservatives, but so many people were paternalistic and protectionist. So many were advocating for government intervention that made things worse. I started talking with sex workers about these problems and how the state wasn't helping, couldn't help. They needed to be left alone. This is when I started looking at non-party organizations that lobby for less government. I actually spent some time with the Occupy Wall Street crowd that fall, which I felt was missing some of the point, but I liked that they were speaking out against government corruption and crony capitalism. I'd already supported things like the Marijuana Policy Project, sure, but I started to see all these other organizations and groups that individually fight specific laws and regulations to improve liberty. And I was really interested in how much more effective they were than a broad-based political party, so I re-engaged not in the Libertarian Party, but in the Libertarian movement. The fifth story, by 2014, I had moved to Los Angeles. I was working for Peter Schiff, and I had rejoined the LP as a member of the LP California. Though I wasn't very enthusiastic about it, I had made many new Libertarian friends, mostly on the internet at that point. This was exciting because rather than just people who were friends with my parents and as old as they were, I met new people, young people. I began writing for a little publication called Thoughts on Liberty. In the couple of years prior, I had begun reading a lot of these libertarian publications besides Reason and FEE, but Toll was particularly interesting to me because it was written entirely by women. Once upon a time, we were maybe 5% of the movement, but I started to realize that it seemed to be closer to 30% of the movement. Photographs taken by Jude Wise at various conferences like Freedom Fest and ISFLC started to fill the internet with images of diverse, young, inspired people who came in more than just one gender or color. Though they were all typically shot in black and white, the libertarian movement, though through his photographs, started to get really, really attractive and better branded. Not just attractive for libertarians, but for mainstream appealing. After my experiences in 2008, I thought I'd never want to be around libertarians again, but we are actually starting to grow better here. This was opening up the big tent of libertarianism and letting people in. This was about reaching those pro-choice, anti-war liberals I knew and reaching those anti-NSA, anti-tax conservatives I knew and letting them bring their own flavors and their own variations and just calling it a bigger movement with enough people to actually do all the things we want to do. This was powerful to me because we'd always been shorthanded on enthusiastic volunteers in the LP. But here were college students who had the time and energy to dedicate these various organizations, ready to activate on campus, to lobby, and to get involved. This was when I started to realize that we have what we need to succeed. Okay, gotta keep an eye on the time here. Lessons learned. I've learned a few lessons over 28 years as a second-generation libertarian. One, I learned that I was on the losing team, and that's a heartbreaking moral killer. I learned that the left and the right have ways in which they can be our allies. I stand by the fact that libertarianism is neither left nor right philosophy, but that doesn't mean we need to go scaring off potential allies on either side. I learned that giving up on the Libertarian Party doesn't mean you stop being a libertarian, it just means you get less frustrated by it. I learned that there are all sorts of organizations doing successful activism for liberty causes outside the party. Lastly, I learned that we actually have all our tools for success when we put that all together. Now, plenty of terrible things have happened to us in the last 15 years when it comes to liberty. There have been new wars, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Patriot Act, higher mandatory minimums, aggressive attempts to regulate away a woman's right to her own body, terrifying new programs to spy on all of our communication, but there's actually been an amazing amount of progress for liberty. There is no time in human history that I'd rather be alive. For example, a California law just went to effect last week, allowing women to buy birth control over the counter without a prescription. Gay marriage is now legal in all 50 states. Because gay marriage is now legal in all 50 states, we actually see mainstream politicians talking about getting government out of marriage altogether, which that's what I call for. Cannabis is legal in some form in 23 states and D.C. In 5 states and D.C., cannabis is fully legal. Companies like Uber, Lyft, and Airbnb are providing disruptive market solutions to entrenched union monopolies and enabling easier exchange between participants in an open app-based market. New education models such as Khan Academy are being tried. John Mackey from Whole Foods is teaching hippies about conscious capitalism. WikiLeaks is working to make governments more transparent. Ron Paul, running for president in 2008-2012, brought many young people into the movement, where they've started reading Mises and Rothbard and becoming some of the hardest working activists. Chelsea Manning informed the American people of military abuses. Edward Snowden informed American people we were being spied on by our own government. We now all have cameras on our phones now and are able to record and upload videos of police abuse, leading to movements like Black Lives Matter, creating mainstream uproar over the police state. Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency, is now accepted in varying forms by Overstock, WordPress, Amazon, Virgin, Galactic, Target, Reddit, Tesla, Expedia, Tiger Direct, and dozen other businesses you've actually heard of. The darknet is starting to create safer ways like Silk Road for people to access recreational drugs until we achieve legalization, and people are starting to write about the dangers of drug prohibition. Portugal decriminalized drugs 15 years ago, and the drug use has declined. It has also provided example to the world about ending the drug war. The Free State Project has reached 20,000 signers and has triggered the move. Organizations like Students for Liberty are training some of the new generation of entrepreneurs, leaders, with over 1,000 student groups across the world. Say what you want about them not being libertarian enough, but Congressman Massey, Congressman Amash, and Senator Rand Paul are all libertarianish and are doing some good work in Washington, D.C. on certain issues. A Reuters poll last year showed that 1 in 5 Americans called themselves a libertarian when asked, not in some roundabout way, they were actually asked, do you consider yourself a libertarian? 20% said yes. A recent poll comparing potential LP nominee Gary Johnson to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump showed him at 11%. We also just witnessed the first nationally televised Libertarian Party debate on Stossel last week. Again, gotta pay attention here. Time. In conclusion, here's the big thing, though, that I want you to take away from this list of wins coupled with my stories. We can do it alone, and we can't do it alone, and we don't have to. Most of these successes listed did not happen as a result of activism by the Libertarian Party, but some of them happened with the Libertarian Party, and most might not have happened if the LP hadn't been doing what it's been doing for the last 40 years. The LP, though ahead of many of the curves in theory, have been a bit slower on the effective activism than a lot of other groups and organizations, and that's been a really big shame. I've been in the LP. It's hard to win in politics when you focus on actual change through the political process. It's not surprising that we keep losing and we keep failing, and we keep losing morale and heart. We've had to tell far too many activists in the past not to go near the LP because it will break their spirit. But I think now it might be time. The libertarian movement isn't nearly over. It's literally just started. We need to remember always to look at our wins and to own them as a movement. We need to build coalitions with one another to not judge our success. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll catch you this Friday.